Hello, friends. My name's Tami Simon, and I'm the founder of Sounds True, and I want to welcome you to the Sounds True podcast, Insights at the Edge. I also want to take a moment to introduce you to Sounds True's new membership community and digital platform. It's called Sounds True One. Sounds True One features original, premium, transformational docuseries, community events, classes to start your day and relax in the evening, special weekly live shows, including a video version of Insights at the Edge with an after-show community question and answer session with featured guests. I hope you'll come join us, explore, come have fun with us, and connect with others. You can learn more at join.soundstrue.com. I also want to take a moment and introduce you to the Sounds True Foundation, our nonprofit that creates equitable access to transformational tools and teachings. You can learn more at soundstruefoundation.org. And in advance, thank you for your support. Hello, friends, and welcome to this special edition of Insights at the Edge with Otto Scharmer. It's special in terms of its depth and length, and also because Otto Scharmer and his teachings on awareness-based systems change, how who we are, our quality of attention, our interior awareness and development makes a difference in the world in terms of change making. That is a topic that I have so many questions about and is so important to me. Otto Scharmer brings his teachings on awareness-based systems change to Sounds True's program, the Inner MBA, applying the inner development that we do to the world of business, to our organizations. And here for the first time, Otto's joining me on Insights at the Edge. Otto was born near Hamburg, Germany, and then at MIT, as a researcher and senior lecturer, he engaged in a study of innovators, people who are new types of creators in the world of business, technology, science. And through that study and seeing what is it that enables them to come up with breakthrough ideas, he developed something called Theory U, which is a framework, a practice, and in many ways, the seeds of a movement about how we can use presencing, inner presencing, outer presencing with others to create change at this time. In the Inner MBA, Otto teaches on leading in times of disruption. And that's what we'll be talking about here. You can learn more about the Inner MBA at innermbaprogram.com. And with that, Otto, I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. Let's get at it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me as one of your guests, Tami. It's a great delight to reconnect with you.
I heard you say in a conversation that you had the sense that this time we're in, this time of great disruption, it's a time that you feel you were, quote unquote, born for in a certain kind of way. And I think that's true. The module that you teach in the Inner MBA is leading in times of disruption. This is clearly a time of great disruption. But I want to know about you. Why do you feel, what's happening in your own sense of inner direction that you feel, I was called for this time?
Well, maybe let me respond with a little story. Or start the response with a little story that comes to my mind. A few weeks back, we were starting a project and, ecosystem-wide leadership journey at the UN towards UN 2.0. It's really kind of around how to transform the UN to better meet the moment, essentially. And at the beginning, as we often are, and probably we all can relate to this experience one way or another, there was this sense of that you often meet today. I would say almost like a collective depression, right? Kind of so a little bit downbeat. It's so many things moving in the wrong direction, and it's this sense of that you find particularly among younger people and younger generations today, that all these massive developments, well progressing and moving in the wrong directions, and whatever I do, right, as a person, has zero impact on where things are going. So this sense of disempowerment and this kind of that's really, this sense is at the source of this collective depression, by which I mean the illusion of insignificance. So the illusion of that, how I show up, how I pay attention to the situation, how I connect with my own deeper life's intention, and how I connect and activate my own agency doesn't matter to the situation at hand. So that was very present in the room. And then a colleague of mine, Martin Kalungu-Bander, kind of a colleague, a Zambian, who does a lot of work across Africa and is currently living in Oxford, UK. He, co-facilitating this session, posed the following question. Because everything was, all the indicators, right? We have been making, as everyone knows, for 70 years, real progress, right? After the Second World War on many, many different fronts. And now the past decade or so, things, or the past few years, really, things in terms of war, in terms of inequality, in terms of gender equity, and so on. You can go down in terms of democracy, you can go down the whole list. All the indicators, we have lost in years progress we made in throughout decades, and not the full progress, but part of it. And in the light of that, so here's what Martin said. Martin said, "What if the UN had been founded for exactly this kind of moment?" And then, in that conversation, and you could really see how that whole reframing, it's not like, oh, everything was kind of moving in the right direction. Now everything is turning the other way. What can we do? No, it was, what if exactly the situation we are in right now is exactly that with my whole journey that brought me up to this point have been prepared for to rise to the occasion. And so that was then the question that came up in the conversation among them. So, and really moving this sense, or you could say this, perceived victim mindset, right? This is happening to us. And, there's like, what can we do towards maybe this is exactly what's bringing together here to rise to the occasion in the face of this together. So it's essentially, if you want, it's a reframing, right, of the larger narrative in a way that is not saying actually these difficult developments that I mentioned before are not true. No, they are factually true. But it's a reframing in terms of what really deserves our attention. And what deserves our attention is what is kind of the other part of the story. So I believe we live in a moment with two narratives. One is the one I already indicated, right? Kind of something that's ending and dying. And then there is another story, kind of, and all the environmental issues, the hyperpolarization and inequality issues, and the pandemic of mental health and so on. But then there's another story. And the other story is really about a new presence, a new quality of connection that we have to each other, to the planet, and to ourselves, being born, being cultivated and being the starting point for a whole new web of connections, of initiatives, of relationships that we see taking shape in so many communities right now. So that's kind of the story of, you could say, where not only a new society, I would say, it's really kind of across civilizations, where a new civilization, one that is based on reconnecting with the planet, reconnecting with each other, and reconnecting with ourselves, not only on a mental level, but also on a level of opening our heart, is turning into practical activities. It's turning into practical innovations. And then I would say it's the second story that's happening today, and that's the most significant story of our time that is least well told. And the first story, the story of destruction, gets amplified with social media by $1 trillion industry every single day. The second story, the story of emergence and of something new being born, is a story that does not have that amplification mechanism. And that's kind of why we need to come together to create that. We need to come together to create these holding spaces. And, let me, just back up this storyline with one more number, and that will wrap up my first response to you. And the number is 69. A few weeks back, couple of months back now, the new UN Human Development Report came out. It's basically a stock taking of development globally, where we are as a planetary community. And one of the most interesting numbers in that report is 69. 69% of humanity today, according to their polls and according to their research, is willing to sacrifice part of their income to address global challenges like climate change. 69%. But many of these people wrongly believe that they're in the minority in their own communities, in their own countries. So 69%, that's more than 5 billion of us. That is the biggest movement this world, this planet has ever seen, that is not even aware of itself because it cannot see itself, because most people in this movement believe they are in a minority. Kind of, it's just me, but not the other people around me. And I think this gap between the personal willingness to sacrifice something for the common good and the misperception of the collective intention, right, of what others really try to do, and the complete failure of our collective decision-making to really translate the deeply held intention of these 69% into practical results and into collective decision-making. That's one of the most interesting numbers, I would say, that exists today, because they point us at a huge potential. It's a huge potential where a possibility that is present and that many people are aware of today has not quite landed yet. And I think leaning into this space of possibility, and everyone knows really when you look at history and how does the new happen? Well, essentially, it's always the same story, right? It's through movements, right? So politicians do what social movements in societies make them do. And so it's, how to turn these 69% really into a multi-local and multi-regional and cross-sectoral movement that is working towards actively bridging the ecological, the social, and the spiritual divide. I think that's one of the most timely, interesting, and challenging, and also challenging opportunities of our time.
What would you call such a movement, Otto, that brings those different sectors, if you will, and concerns together to galvanize the 69% plus?
Well, currently that movement has not one face, but many faces. It does not have one name, but many, many names. And I'm not even sure how useful it is to move everything under one single banner. I think perhaps one of the most interesting insights up front is there's something wrong with our collective decision making. The problem is not individual intention. The problem is not that people don't know. The problem is not that people don't want to do the right thing. The problem is our collective decision making. So that's kind of the question of democracy. That's it has of governance, of how we come together. But it is also the question of a movement. So what is the right name for that? I think, I don't know. And I'm also hesitant to be very active and, putting a label on that. Because I think to come up the first before maybe a name comes up or a label comes up or several, right? It may be a constellation of frames and names. We should actually move into attention. We should actually move into perception. We should actually move into attending to what it is that's wanting to happen there. And I would say it has in a lot of places to do with how we move from extraction to regeneration, how we move from silo to system, or from ecosystem awareness to ecosystem awareness, as I would like to say. And how do we move from just reacting against the issues of the past towards sensing and actualizing the future that is wanting to emerge?
So, Otto, I'm going to ask my questions as we're talking from a real personal place as I listen to you, because when you talked about, the challenge is collective decision making, it has to do with our democracy and how it's structured and governance. Then I picked up on this other term, the illusion of insignificance, and I immediately felt my own insignificance. I don't know how to make a dent in our collective decision-making process. Better go back to work and see this world I'm part of, it's ending, it's dying, it's going to be horrific for a period of time. Yes, I sense the second narrative coming, but feels over a horizon of tremendous pain. I don't know how to impact collective decision-making, so that's a big question I'm throwing at you that I imagine some listeners share, the sentiment that I'm sharing with you.
Well, I mean, I share it. And to me, the area of impact is wherever you are. So it's, I think what I don't mean to suggest is now everyone has to ruminate about collective decision making or something like that. What I mean is what I want to draw the attention to is how we actually pay attention that in our public space and often also in our lives, there is a disproportion between the story of death and destruction and between the story of emergence and rebirth. And so who is the central agent in this story? It's us, right? And a lot has to do with how we pay and what we choose to pay attention to. So I think the discipline there is really about focusing on the moment. We cannot control the outcomes, but we can control the current moment and how we relate to that. So that's kind of where we have a lot of agency. And that's really what I'm talking about. So each of us is making the impact. So what is it? I said kind of sensing and actualizing the future. What really does that mean? When I use the word future, I use it very differently to the way it's usually used, which is in a much more personal way, right? Usually when, experts talk about the future, 2030, 2050, we have experts talking about what happens in a different time, often in a different place by different people. That's not how I use the word future. When I use the word future, I mean something utmost personal that happens here and now, because it has to do with a sense of possibility that I am aware of, that is connected to my own forward journey, and that is looking at me because it depends on me to manifest. So it doesn't get more personal, right? So again, the future is a possibility that is not me, but that is looking at me because it depends on me to manifest, to come into the real world. And this intimate relationship to something that may emerge but doesn't have to, and that completely depends on how I show up. That really is what I learned from studying innovators, studying kind of creative people, studying people who brought in their discipline something new into the world. It is kind of this felt responsibility for something that is wanting to happen that isn't me, but that is in need of me in order to come into the world. So this this relationship is essentially what I'm talking about. This is what needs attention. And it may be something different for each of us. And each of these stories, each of us matters. The illusion of insignificance is this. It is essentially based on an assumption that there's some big lever out there that if someone is moving it from left to right, something is happening that's solving all these things for us. That's kind of the illusion part, because in reality we know how big change happens, which is it's many seemingly insignificant small things that all add up and that are connected through a web of awareness, through a web of connecting our awareness with our deeper intention of what it is that we want to be in service of. And that's what I believe is what is at the root or the foundation of all movement building, right? It's a shared sense of possibility that you can articulate one way or another, but it's a shared sense that we feel, and that in some cases, in my youth, it brings us together onto the streets, but it also animates us in different ways of showing up in our work, in our lives, in our relationships, in how we show up in difficult situations. That's really what I'm talking about. So it's not an othering of the future that's kind of out there, someone else, something big. No, the future, if this possibility, yes, I mean, I'm not in denial of all the challenging situations. I mean, I alluded to them in the beginning. None of that is wrong. What I'm saying is, and what I'm talking about is my own. You asked kind of, how do you deal with that? And I responded to you, I have the same issue, but what I try to hold is a balance between attending to what's going on, yes, but also attending on my own sphere of influence, where I can actually, in small ways, right? It's always small ways for each of us, can nudge things, can connect things, can show up in an awareness that is not stopping inside my own bubble, right? So I mentioned ecosystem awareness to ecosystem awareness. So progressing from one to the other. What do I really mean with that? I understand that very technical, right? Ecosystem awareness is when your awareness originates from inside your own bubble. That's ecosystem awareness. Ecosystem awareness is when your awareness originates from outside your own bubble, outside the boundaries of your system. For example, by deep listening, right? When you really listen to another person, what she or he or they are trying to convey, when you listen to someone else's story, it's very easy for us as humans. What's happening to us? We are taking a deep dive into that narrative. Suddenly, we are no longer looking at that narrative from outside, but we are inside that story. We begin to sense into a situation through another person's narrative or eyes. And that's what we call empathic listening. We all can do that. That's an example for moving from ego to eco. So I don't mean that in the moral way. I mean that really in a very technical way. Ecosystem awareness is the capacity that we have as humans to operate from beyond of our own bubbles, from beyond of our own physical and institutional boundaries, by opening the mind, opening the heart, and opening our will.
I've heard you, Otto, talk about opening the mind, the heart, and the will. And opening the mind, I think, can be sort of intuitive to people, listening to other perspectives, not judging and shutting down. Opening the heart, I think people may also have a feeling sense of that. Not that there's not a lot more to say about both of those types of opening. But I think when it comes to opening the will, that's where there's this like, what's Otto talking about anyway? So let's go there.
Okay. So just kind of opening the will is actually the most subtle shift, and also the one that usually is least talked about and attended to. So I want to give maybe two approaches, or two ways of understanding that. The first one is just kind of on a very technical level. Opening the mind really means suspending your habits of judgment. Opening your heart really means a redirection. Kind of your attention, your listening begins to happen from the field, from the place someone else is speaking from. And open will really is about letting go and letting come. So open will, letting go, can of course happen on many levels. But so, for example, when you think about social processes, when you think about perhaps workshops, or when you think about difficult situations we have been in, there is this period where we still hold on kind of to the original concept, to the original construct, and everything is kind of readjusted to that until we see it's no longer possible. Then there is this moment of stopping and letting go and opening up. That's kind of that's often in a social process. So, for example, when you facilitate kind of a deeper multi-stakeholder situation and conflict, that's kind of there's until you reach that point where everyone is willing to at least open up to the possibility that there needs to be a letting go. For example, when you merge two organizations, right? So what is it that people hold on to? Their old identities, right? It's still us versus them. And so the letting go is really has a lot to do with our own identities, has a lot to do with what it is, what we choose to in our own story, right? There are many possibilities, but what we choose to wrap our identity around. Now, when I say letting go, I don't mean letting go of everything. So that's not what I'm talking to. What I mean with letting go is letting go of everything that is not essential. And I remember I once interviewed Brian Arthur, who was the lead economist of the Santa Fe Institute, when I conducted that conversation. And he really taught me about that principle, right? The power of intention and how much it has to do with letting go. And when I asked him about the power of intention, right? Whether that he said that's a very powerful force in the universe, whether he could say more about that. So his response was, no, it's not. It's not a powerful force. It's the only force. And then when I asked him to elaborate a little bit on that, he shared a personal story, which was a story of letting go of everything that isn't essential, which, as he added, in his case was just about everything. So everything that is not essential means everything that can get into the way to relate to our deeper sense of intention, to why we are here, what it really is we want to be in service of, and what it really is we want to pursue as a purpose, or we want to help to manifest. And so that's, if you go to that place, it is as much a place of not knowing as it is of knowing. So you could also think about this open will, that you move from the part that you know, which is often the part that's less interesting, towards attending to what we don't know. And you move from all the certainties, what you thought the answer was, towards opening up and allowing the universe to talk to you. So for me, this open will has really everything to do with listening to what my context, what perhaps the planet, and what perhaps the universe is calling on me to do. It's just an openness, right? It's an openness. It's not, okay, now I figured that out and the rest is implementation. It's an inner attunement to a deeper opening, that you allow yourself to stay open to the messages that are coming through to life, through all sorts of experiences you may have. So letting go is really the deeper process of opening that, in terms of your own deepest intention, you realize that you may have like a direction, in terms of knowledge and answers, but that to really take the next step, you need to lean into your own not knowing.
When I hear you talk about open will, Otto, I think of personal experiences, really difficult, challenging experiences. Some people might say that was when I had a dark night of the soul. And I'm curious for you, when you say, oh, this is when I really discovered what open will means in my life. Was there something happening, like you can reference an experience and go, that was an experience where I discovered this?
Many times. So the letting go and letting come experience I have had many times. So and it continues to happen. I remember one of the first times is, I think it's something that I described early in the Theory U book, when I came back as a 16-year-old from the city to our farm, that the 200-300-year-old house kind of we have been living in up to that point, everything was gone. It was taken by the fire. Kind of everything that was left was a burning heap of rubble. So it was, if you want, early in my life, an experience of forced go, right? There was nothing there. I just but I had a deep experience of looking into that fire, because I realized how much what was burning in the fire was related to my own identity, right? That was now how much I was actually, without knowing it, in my identity tied to these material things of the past. And that letting go, seeing in that fire and that letting go, made me realize that there is another part in ourselves that is not gone with the fire. That's still there. And that's actually moved much more into the foreground of my attention, while the otherwise dominant current reality was taken away by the fire. And that other possibility, that other part of myself had to do not with necessity, but with a felt sense of the future, that perhaps I could be, I could help, I could be connected with, or I could help to manifest. And I remember, but there are many forms. I remember another one as a social movement activist around the green and the environmental movement back in the late 70s in Germany. When as a group you experience police violence, that's another. So I wasn't hurt physically, but it was a profound experience to see that violence applied to our collective body, right? Back then it was 100,000 people, and mostly young people. And when I returned home that day, I was no longer the same person. I had complete clarity around what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, changing that system that on that day I had seen in action, and kind of applying kind of these injustices. I remember so sometimes it's something very simple. So I remember when I was an assistant professor at a university in Germany, and we were living in a student community, right? Kind of, it was just kind of a happy bunch, you could say, right? So it was a wonderful place, and we had a wonderful time. But one Saturday morning, out of the blue, so I was just kind of I was in the completion phase of my PhD, and my then girlfriend and today partner, she turned to me and said, "You are not learning here anything new." So it was like, even though it would have never crossed my mind, and the moment she said it, right, it was kind of like someone is taking away a veil, and suddenly I knew she was right. I needed to go to some other place. I also knew instantly, without really thinking about that, what would be the number one place I would be, I would like to explore as a possibility. And that was back then the MIT Learning Center, kind of that Peter Senge, Ed Schein, Chris Argyris, and colleagues, Bill Isaacs, and other colleagues had co-founded, and that brought out a really interesting combination of action, new thinking. But you could already back then, so no one was talking about spirituality or consciousness or so, but the language was in a way that kind of the personal experience was more accentuated. And it clearly felt to me as a place where maybe if you want to launch a different approach, how people think about leadership and systems change, and how we need to reimagine and reshape these realities across institutions late in the last and early in this century, that would be a great place to be. So that put me on that path. And that's essentially, I came here to Boston for a couple of years and so on, and then I never managed to move on. So that is my story in a nutshell. But the trigger was, so that's kind of the third example of letting go and letting come. The trigger was a little challenge that my partner posed to me that allowed me to suddenly realize what I deep down I already knew, but never had consciously thought. So it was a taking away of, it was a removing of the taking for granted of current reality and just allowing the next layer, right? If that's gone, kind of what's the next layer that's coming up? So the open will is something. Who are the greatest teachers on open will? Children. Because children, so for us, if we see a new movement or something, it's very complicated for us to learn this as adults. Children see it, immediately can do it, right? So that's kind of the open will, to kind of move. Open will, essentially, open mind, open heart, and open will are not about just noticing stuff outside, but connecting from within, right? Being the beingness, connecting with the beingness of what we see and being able to embody that. And that's also why what is a practice field that in the Presencing Institute and the U School we have probably the most successful and most usable practice field we have developed to date. And that's Arana Ayashi's work on social presencing theater. Essentially, a blend between awareness, mindfulness, embodied learning, and systems sensing, systems mapping, and systems sensing. So it's a way of exploring not only the intelligence of our physical body. I mean, we all know that there's so much knowing and knowledge in our physical bodies. But then, as she likes to say, there are these two other bodies, right? So we each deal with three bodies. There's the physical body, the small body. There's the big body, which is the body of the planet. And then there is the social body. And the social body essentially is the sum total of our relationships, of how we connect with one another. And so the sum total of our relationships that we enact moment to moment. And becoming aware more of the patterns, how we connect, and the patterns that manifest in qualities of thinking, qualities of conversation, qualities of collaboration. That's essentially what social presencing theater is offering a practice field for. And Theory U has been basically offering a framework to, right? Because Theory U is nothing different than looking at the qualities of relationships across all systems from the viewpoint of different levels of awareness.
Okay, I'm going to track back to something, Otto, because as you were talking about listening to the future in a very personal way, how MIT was calling you, you could hear the call. I was imagining listeners of our conversation feeling into what they're letting go of at this moment in their life and what's calling to them from the future in a very personal way. And then to actually respond to that call, how a certain quality of boldness, or you could say courage, or I have to get over myself and just do it. And I wonder if you can speak some to that, because, you know, here you are, you're very, you're not an arrogant person, far from it. I've asked you to say, why are you a person for this time? And you talked about, you know, a whole field, the UN. You're not here being like, it's the Otto Scharmer show. And yet you've manifested a certain kind of, you know, I will go for it when called. That's the quality I'm wondering if you can speak to.
Yeah. It's a good question. I'm not so sure, Tami. I mean, to be perfectly honest,
Sure.
people, I have heard several times, oh, it's so courageous to do this and that and so on. And then I think, well, is it really courageous? I mean, so yes, I left the traditional academic career path and so on. But what's the big courage? I mean, how much was I really interested? Yeah, I mean, I was initially to some degree. Yes, I'm not saying there was no letting go, and I'm not saying that comes that you know, and it does come with ambivalent feelings until today sometimes. But in reality, it's not a big sacrifice. It may look like for some people. For me, it never was a really big sacrifice because I, in a way, almost did the same thing, which is just doing the obvious. So trying to make sense until something is really clear that it makes sense, and then following that path. So it's not like, so in that regard, it's much more, in a way, common sense and less about like a heroic act, right? Kind of where, and so I want to give, so it's much more, so I want to give maybe another very recent example of that, because that puts it a little bit into context. So I was a couple of months back, I was in Latin America and in Chile. And so we, a year before, we launched something new there. And so maybe I should, you know, give a little backdrop here. So 10 years ago, I was really frustrated, because I always had this, you know, we indicated that, and usually, honestly, I would not be honest about that. I always felt kind of that we need a larger movement, right? I wouldn't often talk about it because people think, oh, that sounds too grandiose or something, right? It's not down to earth. But in my heart, I always felt that. So, but then I see, so what do? You do small things, right? Something here, something there, and so on. And then you get frustrated because how is the small things you do, you know, you see, you're very aware of the gap with your original aspiration that you had, right? What you thought was really necessary and you would like to contribute towards. So then 10 years ago, you know, there was, you know, I will skip over the details of that story, but essentially, unexpectedly, a possibility opened up so that I could essentially take my class that I teach here at MIT Sloan onto what back then was launched as MITx, right? And edX, kind of an open learning platform, right? That MIT was the original pioneer of. So I had the fortune kind of to be one of the early guinea pigs, not really first generation, but, you know, soon in the relative early stage. And we created a new learning platform. It's called ULab. that really it's free, accessible until today. It has newer cohorts every single year, has lots of great tools, and allows people to self-organize in communities. So it really has, we have more than 250,000 registered users and so forth. So practically in most cities in the world, kind of there's like, they have been existing. Some still exist and some not. These hubs, right, that formed and where people just dream up interesting things and then use awareness-based methods and tools to make it happen. So that was one story. But I always felt that, okay, so now what's the next thing? And we always believed that the future of online is offline, right? You need to get much deeper into the in-person stuff. So then with my colleagues in Latin America, we dreamed up something, which is coming together across the entire continent, right? Change makers, a larger group. You just take a week per year, like 4 days, 4 days, something. And you do that over 3 years. So you have like place-based initiatives from the 17 of the 19 Latin American countries. And they all gather together, and it includes indigenous leaders who do healing, practices and participate. So it's something that is practical. It deals with all the different ecosystems and the systems change initiatives. It's very personal, it has to do with how we relate to the land, to the planet. It is probably, so it involved, when I was there for 10 days the last time, it involved with all the local adjacent events, 1,000 people. And I was just amazed how this potential of change, it's the first time I really saw it activated that deeply on such a scale across all these boundaries, right? All the sectors, countries, languages, and in part belief systems. So seeing how that can grow together made me aware of one thing, which is transformational work, activating the potential that the 69% represent is much easier than we think. Because collectively, as a planetary community, we go through what I would call the bottom of the U, but essentially is a process of letting go and letting come, right? We go through a profound crisis of letting go and regeneration. And because everyone who deals with social change today is already experiencing that because we all are part of the collective. We all are part of the collective field, whether you're conscious or not. You have that experience already in your social field. Because of that, if you build the right kind of container, the right holding spaces, a lot can happen in just 4 days. A lot more happens today in just 4 days than has happened 10 or 20 years ago, by far. In other words, transformation in the face of our current holy crisis and moment of disruption is not becoming more difficult, but the readiness is almost there everywhere, at least as far as the 69% is concerned. And when I saw that, I asked myself, when I came back from that, what am I doing with my life? Why is it I'm not doing this, going from country to country? What might happen, right? If this intensity of work and of really activating what is already there. There's nothing you need to bring into that. You just need to create this holding space and allow these deeper resonances in that social field, allow the generative level of the social field to be activated. So why is it we are not doing this in all places, right? In all regions? And what would it take? So that was disruptive for some of the other things, but that's an example, right? And it's not, so first there is an experience, you experiment with something, you have an experience, and then you contemplate on that experience and ask yourself, if this is really a foreshadowing of the future, what is this calling on me to do? That's the letting come, right? So it's not like I have the answer, I project that out into the world, but more, given what I experienced, right, with that community, what does it want me to do to really evolve and manifest in the way that I sense is wanting to happen? So the letting come is essentially an orientation of your own attention. And back then, 10 years, 20 years ago, I described this, I wrote this book, Theory U, it's like totally unreadable, I would say. But, there's a shorter version with the essentials. But today, that's kind of more accessible. But today, I would just summarize the entire process with just 3 words. And the 3 words are attention, intention, and agency. And the 2 sentences, the relationship between the 2 is this. Attention, if deepened, gives rise to intention, to what is, to what I'm here for, right? My sense of calling, my deeper sense of calling. And intention, if clarified and deepened, gives rise or catalyzes agency. So that's that is, I believe, what many of us already experience on a personal level. And that is also what I believe, if we do that in communities, locally, regionally, and across regions, that if that happens more on a community or a systems level, allows us to transform these systems that today are more harmful than helpful, and that today, under current conditions, often lead us to collective results that nobody wants.
So just to clarify, Otto, when you talk about the generative nature of the social field and how the experience you had in Latin America showed you this power, you saw it in action. Can you help us understand that and how that model, how I could use that in my life, or a listener could say, oh, I get it now. I get it. Otto says transformation is not as hard as I think it is. I think it's really hard.
Okay, so maybe I should clarify what I tried to say. What I saw in Latin America is something I have seen many times before, right? It's nothing new, but it was the level of ease, the level of naturalness to dropping into that space, and the level of diversity, right? The diversity of the group, right? Really across the sectors, across the political spectrum, across worldviews and identities is just stunning. And that you can, that it's possible today in a world that is characterized by hyperpolarization and that whole narrative around that you can create conditions that allow us to come together, not with negotiating our ego interests and so on, but in a way of really attending to what's actually happening in our larger community, and how can we rearrange and reconnect our relationships in a way that allows us to move from collectively creating the results that nobody wants to collectively realigning attention, intention, and agency. And I think that's a story that often we experience on a small scale, but that is often missing, but not totally missing on the larger scale. When you think about the Paris Agreement, I would say that's an example where it happened on a very large scale. But often, as we all know, collective decision-making is hijacked by special interest groups. It's kind of not happening in that way. And what I saw in South America is the ease and the depths, of bringing kind of very diverse groups together. You can say that the social situation in many countries in South America is even more extreme, right? Neoliberalism was first prototype in Chile. I mean, that's really the place. It came later here. So you can say Latin America, in terms of the crisis and disruption, is probably a few steps ahead of us. And ahead of many other places, but we all are heading in that direction. So in that regard, I really pay attention to these experiences there. And what I saw is something that's very encouraging, because I have seen it in many other places as well. When you work in situations of crisis, in situations of disruption, change can happen much faster, much deeper, but the same disruption can also lead to more fragmentation, into more isolation. And whether one happens or the other is a function of two things. One is our awareness, right? Whether we are kind of turning away and closing down, or whether we are turning toward and opening up to what this moment is really wanting us to do. And two, the quality of holding space. That's really what I'm getting at. It's the quality of the holding space. So the missing piece is not individual intention. The missing piece is the quality of the container. And that is as true for a one-on-one conversation as it is what we do, the conversation we have in a classroom, the situation the conversation we have in a multi-stakeholder meeting, the conversation we have in our team, in our organizations, the conversations we have across sectors and larger systems change initiatives. That's what I'm talking about, and that's where the awareness of the crisis is helping with easing the letting go. Because what does disruption at the end of the day mean? It means something very simple. It's going to change. The future is going to look different from the past. That's what disruption is. So by definition, there is a moment of letting go and letting come. And all I'm saying is, everyone knows that already. And therefore, the perceived impossibility of creating new patterns of connection with one another is a misperception. And what is lacking is the quality spaces, the quality holding spaces, but to some degree, also the social technologies, kind of the methods, the tools, how you actually shift a conversation from debate to dialogue, and so on and so forth. It's kind of these methods and tools, and that's why I find that, I am, my field is change and kind of systems thinking, and what's the key metaphor we all have been using for the past 100 years? it's the iceberg, right? Kind of, so there's kind of one part visible, a small part above the waterline, and then everything else below the waterline. And that's what you try to understand, the deeper layers of the iceberg. And I always thought, okay, 100 years on, maybe it's time to come up with a new metaphor. And the metaphor that kind of my new book that I'm in the process of writing and completing is around the social field. And the metaphor, the roots for that metaphor from my own life experience is the farm I grew up on, kind of my parents, who some 65 years ago shifted their way of farming from conventional to regenerative. And when you're a regenerative farmer, kind of when you listen to them, when you grow up on a regenerative farm, what's the number one thing that you learn? It's all about the quality of the soil, right? And the quality of the ecosystem. So all the attention, and you realize that the quality, if you don't use pesticides and chemical fertilizers and so on, the quality of what's growing above the ground is a function of the quality of the soil. And today, right, many years later, and a few thousand miles apart from that farm, I believe I'm still doing the same thing. Because in the field of social change, if you're an educator, a parent, if you are a therapist, if you're a leader in any kind of organization, we all deal with what? With social fields. And so there's kind of the visible part of the social fields, the practical results that we create. And what's the invisible part? It's the quality of our relationships. And so that's kind of the quality of the soil, right? The quality of our relationships and the quality of our awareness of how we pay attention to them. And how much where our awareness is originating from inside or outside my own bubbles and boundaries. And that's really, so essentially, I think we are stuck in the world today because all the attention is going to the results above the ground. But to really shift the system, we need to cultivate the social soil. We need to cultivate the quality of our relationships. And for that, we need methods, tools, practice fields, and holding spaces. And it's funny, right? So I'm a change maker. We have kind of developed, I have been working really with communities around the world, across sectors, and making this stuff happen. And I thought, that's the difficult part. And once kind of you demonstrated that, then you could take these living examples and take it to the next level, right? Kind of make them available, democratize the access to them. And that, interestingly, seems to be the most difficult part because, I can fund all sorts of things, practical projects, right? What I cannot fund is democratizing access to that, so I would say the most important work that I can contribute today, like the example in Latin America, is exactly the part of the work that's almost unfundable because it doesn't fit the existing frameworks of foundations and so on and so forth. While the stuff that I can fund and do fund are actually in areas that are also significant, but much, much less significant in terms of systems change. So, and that's, I'm sharing that because I think many of us have that experience, right? And yet the quality, so you can fund what's growing above the ground, but you can't fund improving the quality of the social soil. And yet that's the most important thing today. And each of us, because we enact as human beings these relationships together, each of us is a gardener of that social field. And that's why we need everyone to participate in the shifting and the deepening and the cultivating of these relationships.
Otto, there's so much I want to talk with you about, but I am zeroing in. I want to make sure I understand your soil metaphor. It's based on these high quality, good soil, high quality relationships, lots of relationships that go out into the edges, not just the people close to me. What else makes healthy soil?
Well, I mean, a farmer would respond. It's kind of it's the right kind of plants, right? Plants with good roots, right? That's kind of really what's creating the soil, and that's kind of the plant-based also carbon sequestering, right? Kind of storing, soil is regenerative soil is really the organic matter, right? Kind of and so I would say the number one thing probably is that is the quality of how we pay attention to that. And also the spaces that we create where you experience a different quality of a social field. So it's something that the body knows the moment you enter it. But if you have not seen it and experienced it, it's you can't explain it with words. I still remember when I arrived at the back then at the MIT Learning Center, and I saw for the first time how with a group of 100 people you could work in a way that is deeply, deeply personal, right? That is actually inside that larger group more personal and more intimate than it would be if it were just 5 people there or just 2 or 3, and kind of more directly relating to your own essence. So that's why, back to the Latin American example, kind of, so you don't need I saw that once I saw that once, and immediately my body and my mind knew, I didn't know that was possible, right? The moment I felt it, I experienced it, and that moment, a whole new set of possibilities is opening up in front of your mind right away. And I think that's why what we learned over the years is, yes, you need tools, but it's not enough. Because what you really need is practice fields, kind of where you kind of experience that. And yes, practice fields is important, but also that is not enough, because you need these larger arenas where when you enter them, you feel a different sense of connection. There's something that happens, right, on the level of our vibrations of the mind and the heart when we know that, right? So when you enter an organization, when you come back to a group, right? Kind of, you can feel the vibe. You don't need anyone to explain. So there is like an embodied knowing that's accessible for us. And so if what is a good school, right? A good school is a school that is activating generative fields. Because if I experience that as a learner, it awakens up the seeds of generative awareness and action that are already within me, but that if not awakened, if not put into a soil, we all know, kind of, you take seeds, you put it on fertile soil, and then kind of a miracle happens. You take the same seed, you put it on a stone, nothing is going to happen. So the difference, what is the soil? It is being in a field. So I have seen that often. The way we as humans wake up to our deeper and higher possibility in life is by seeing one other person who does it. There's kind of like some transmission going on. If you see people operating from a deeper place, it's not that you may think, oh, now I'm indoctrinated, now I'm running behind whatever this person has been preaching. No, it's I am waking, so I see that someone can be a social entrepreneur, can be someone else. So I see someone really operating from their deeper sense of purpose. And what I experience in myself is I'm suddenly waking up to something that's present within me that I wasn't aware of before. So sometimes there's you're in front of these people. Sometimes there's someone is listening to you in a way that is actually much deeper than you ever listen to yourself. I remember I was doing, as a student, I was doing an interview with a philosopher. Right? I was studying economics. I had no idea of philosophy. So yet I read all his books, or some of them. I interviewed him. He granted me an interview. For me, it was like a big event, right? Kind of in my own mind, kind of there's Plato, Aristotle, Confucius, and then this guy, right? So it's kind of that's how I was halfway in shock that he even gave me an appointment. He was very kind, answered all my questions, and then as I was packing up my recorder and was almost on my way out, he turned to me and said, I expect a lot of you in the future. I expect a lot from you in the future. So out of the blue, and I almost thought, well, he must be talking to someone else, but I knew there was no one else in the room, right? It was me. But he addressed me in a way that I would have never allowed myself to think about myself, right? Because it would be arrogant, whatever. And so it, it felt like it uplifted my own sense of self into a direction that I never went, and that was more like. So when I went out of that, I was puzzled by that, and I was a little bit less sure about my own certainties about what I could do and couldn't do, right? So I was more open, and the gateway in his case is listening, attending to me in a way, and perhaps giving me feedback or irritating me. I mean, with that question that invited me to let go of some of my old certainties. And so that, it was very subtle, but it always stayed with me. So not as a exclamation mark, as a question mark, right? I was less sure about, more open to maybe there's something else. And so it was that question mark that allowed, what is letting go? It's a question mark, right? An exclamation mark turns into a question mark. That's letting go and letting come, or that the beginning of letting come. So all of these are examples of soil, right? How do you improve the quality of the soil? Deep listening, loving attention, moving from debate to dialogue, creating and inviting people into holding spaces. Like in my case, I needed to see it once, and immediately it shifted my entire sense of the future of what was possible. So it's sometimes you just need to see one person who is embodying something different. That was for me the case, early on as a student in Berlin when I met this peace researcher, Johann Galtung. The whole place was a disappointment, right? That whole university. But that one person, that was enough. So if one person can do it, something else is possible. So you can do it too. And I think that's so it's small things. It's interesting that these deep shifts, and the quality of the social soil is. It can be small things that make such a huge difference for others.
Otto, thank you for sharing that about the transmission power, if you will, that can come from an interaction with a person where you kind of catch something that's a fire in them. It catches inside of you. And I was reflecting before our conversation Why am I so excited to talk to Otto Scharmer? This is the 800 plus interview I've done here on the Insights at the Edge. And it's something about that I feel from you, which is pushing me now to ask you yet a further question that's personal in nature and a little mysterious, which is, at Sounds True, we inquire quite a bit into identity. Who are we anyway as these individual human beings, part of an ecosystem? And I'm wondering, how do you experience your own quote unquote identity?
I'm a white Northern European German male, German American, who lived half his life over there, half his life here in New England. Being born as a German puts your whole identity, there's the Holocaust, there's all these, World War One, World War Two, and so on. So there's a very difficult history, collective history. What it does to you as a young person is there's never this naive identity with your collective, right? It's broken, right? There's there's space in between. So it's more like it's a complex relationship with many different levels. What I experience is as I have been working and engaged in a number of projects in different parts of the world over many years, right? So I'm not kind of the person who goes, to many places, right? Once or twice. So I go to very few places forever, right? For many years, because it's kind of these long-term relationships in different parts of the world that really allow the deep learning. And it makes you essentially a misfit everywhere, because there's a part of me that feels no, it's funny to say, but that feels Chinese, right? So that's something not very popular these days here, but it's true. There's it's basically through your friends and personal experiences, kind of you can with your heart, right? I think it's the more your heart relates. It's not like I am them, right? So it's not that kind of identity, but the identity becomes more porous and more distributed and less really related to the parts. And so I would say what we lived through with mass migration in this century, just beginning, is this kind of blended multiple identity. Essentially, you're a misfit wherever you go, right? And it's a process also of individuation that yet has deep community roots. So it's kind of and that's maybe when I once read a Japanese philosopher, and he was talking about the spiritual experience, or the experience of God, I think he said. And he referred to it as the alien part in myself. So in your own experience, there is an alien part. It shows up in your experience, but it's not of you. It's coming through you. I thought that was a very interesting way of framing it. And what I today believe, so what is shaping my identity none of the parts. I think they're what's shaping my identity is actually more a sense of awakening planetary connection that I experience on a deep human level in so many places. And that that has my attention. So I also think that all of us who deal with social change, who deal with human relationships, have a much deeper level, a profound spiritual experience in many of these deeper social changes that usually we are completely unaware of. So it happens more on a subconscious level, kind of on a. But what I learned is if you create holding spaces where we slow down, where we attend, where we allow what is more in the background, allow more to rise to the surface of our awareness, that this sense of connection and interconnectedness, without really, I think there is, it's just intensifying. So it gets like more complicated, kind of. So you can no longer say where one, say the individual is ending and kind of where, another one is beginning. So there is, I would say, the deeper levels of experience that, for example, when you are in a deep generative dialogue, when you move into a process of thinking together, these are experiences where the boundaries between us collapse and where something is emerging that is coming through us, but not necessarily from us. So it's, and that's, I think, an experience that even though as cultures, as histories, and, through all different other forms of different identities, we are very different from each other. That's also true. But there's kind of this universality of the deeper layers of connection that we in these special moments, and that when we activate a generative social field, can experience together. And in fact, the word humanity is the same word, has the same word root than the word soil, right? Kind of, so soil is humus, right? Humus and humanity and humility all share the same Indo-European word root. So it's essentially the same. That's and so what is, just as the soil requires cultivation and attention and intention, I think the social soil also requires that. And that is, that's why these holding spaces, how we pay attention to our, not only the results, right, what's above the ground, but to the quality of connection, is so critical these days. So I would say the most important condition for how we improve the quality of the soil is our capacity to how we attend, how we become aware, how we slow down, and how we allow the deeper layers of our own intentionality, of our own calling, if you want, to come to the surface and guide our actions forward. I think that's what so many people are looking for these days. And yet, the way we organize our everyday reality is the complete absence of that, right? So we have the downloading, we have kind of all the, but I think the awareness that we really want to connect with one another in very different spaces, but we don't know exactly how to hold these spaces, that awareness is quite developed. And I think that's that is a wonderful news, and why I don't like to be optimistic. I mean, optimism is in a way, no, but I'm hopeful. So I like that word better. So I'm hopeful. And the reason why I'm hopeful and why I really believe in our agency is that the human spirit, right? What is always in all these linear predictions of everything that's going to hell is not accounted for is the awakening of the human spirit, right? It's our own. And when you look at how transformation works in human history, so the awakening can happen in the moment. It's not kind of one drip at a time over 50 years, right? So our story as humans is first we screw up everything pretty thoroughly, kind of we can put a check on that part. And then we realize when we are lucky what we did, and that we need to look into the mirror, we see and sense ourselves. And from that slowing down of the attention, from really kind of connecting with not only what is, but what is wanting to emerge in this moment, we begin to operate very differently. And this is a process we see in so many examples right now. It's not, okay, I need to go to Latin America for that. I only gave that example because it happens there. What anyway happens in many places in a variety of more distributed forms. There is where it comes together, and where it really, in a quite natural way, is beginning to form kind of a larger shared holding space. And we are now beginning to initiate kind of similar developments over the next few months, kind of in Asia Pacific, in Africa, and beginning also in other places. So I think this is just kind of one of many examples underway right now, but there's a lot that's happening, but usually the primary narrative is the other one, as we discussed before, and that's why it's worth placing our attention onto that phenomenon, because that's how we create the future. We grow in the direction of the question we ask, right? Kind of probably many know this line. We can also say we grow in the direction we turn our attention, right? We grow in the direction where we succeed in realigning attention and intention, not just on a personal level, but also on the level of the social field.
Otto, what a terrific conversation, what a terrific opportunity this has been for me to connect with you and for the Insights at the Edge listeners to connect with you. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing. If people want to get a hold of you and learn more about the Presencing Institute, what's the best way?
Well, there's if you type in u-school.org or Presencing, kind of you end up at the U-School website. There's lots of great resources there. You can also just type in ottoscharmer.com. It's just my name, ottoscharmer.com. That's my homepage there. That's where I have a bunch of blogs and little pieces. And then, I think if you think about a book, the one that may be usable and readable, kind of that I would recommend is Essentials of the one that has been published. But largely what we talked about is really also the evolution of Theory U into really an evolved concept of awareness-based systems change. And that's kind of, the new book is really So the working title is Presencing 7 Practices for Cultivating the Social Field, or for Transforming the Social Field. And that will come out in March 2025, so in a few months.
And for those of you who are interested, check out innermbaprogram.com. Otto's part of our guest faculty. Our next cohort starts in September. We run the 9-month online immersion once each year. Otto, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tami.
Thank you. Thank you. Big heart embrace. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. Very nice to connecting to you. Look forward to reconnecting otherwise soon.
And if you'd like to watch Insights at the Edge on video and participate in the after-show Q&A session with our guests, come join us on Sounds True 1, a new membership community featuring award-winning original shows, live classes, community learning, guided meditations, and more with the leading wisdom teachers of our time. Use promo code PODCAST to get your first month free. You can learn more at join.soundstrue.com. Sounds True, waking up the world.